Hello everyone, my name is Mr. Gentleman and we are here to do one thing and one thing only, and that is to talk about Square's first action RPG. Square's actual first action RPG, Seiken Densetsu, otherwise known as Final Fantasy Adventure or Mystic Quest. This analysis will be based on the original Game Boy version of the game. With Square now a successful company, they sought to expand their operations. In 1989, they trademarked the name Seiken Densetsu or Legend of the Sacred Sword, to be used in a game subtitled The Emergence of Excalibur. The project, originally led by Kazuhiko Aoki, was to be a Famicom Disk System game that would span 5 discs. Square even solicited pre-orders while early in production, but the ambitious venture was cancelled in its planning stages. In October, Square sent out a letter informing customers of the cancellation and of their refund, but they had hoped they would put their money towards Square's Final Fantasy franchise. In 1990, after the completion of Final Fantasy III, Square gave franchise veteran Koichi Ishii an opportunity to direct a spin-off. The game underwent the working title Gamma Knights. Square eventually renewed the trademark of their failed Famicom epic, giving way to Seiken Densetsu, Final Fantasy Gaiden, meaning Legend of the Sacred Sword Final Fantasy side story. Ishii conceived of the story's basis while a relatively new employee, Yoshinori Kitase, a former film student turned game designer and future director and producer of many Final Fantasy games, would flesh out the concept into a script. Ishii directed the game and designed the characters. The gameplay that would become what we see actually began as an experimental tennis game by Goro Ohashi. The court eventually integrated scrollable screens. The racket and ball became the playable character and weapon, the opposing rackets became enemies, and the court eventually became the overworld. Seiken Densetsu, though made in the infancy of handheld development, is a pleasant surprise that has aged incredibly well. In fact, I think surprise is an apt description for Final Fantasy Adventure's entire experience. You turn on the game, name the characters who we will refer to by their canon names, Sumo and Fuji, and enter into this top-down action RPG, and to your amazement, Sumo is immediately thrown into a boss fight against a jackal in a gladiatorial arena. This seems like an unusual way to tutorialize you, but the boss moves slowly, does forgiving damage, and will not move below a certain part of the screen. It's a very dynamic way to get both you into the story and learn the controls, learning what works and also getting into the character's life as an enslaved gladiator. Sumo and his friends such as Amanda are being forced to fight for the Empire, and we are quickly introduced into the state of this world. Seeing his friend Will die, Sumo escapes after his next fight. The entire experience uses a strong sense of immediacy to get you into the game and into the plight of our main character. After overhearing the Dark Lord and his Archmage Julius conspiring to find the monastery, as well as speak of a girl who could lead them to it, the Dark Lord tosses you down the waterfall, beginning a series tradition. Of course, you manage to survive with a simple ouch. You discover a girl who has lost her protector, and after bringing her to the Gemma Knight Bogart who recognizes her pendant, you agree to continue accompanying her. The premise of discovering a mysterious girl is promising, and we will see how the game handles it. The story's Dark Lord literally being named Dark Lord as you imagine gives the narrative a simple basis. While that will remain somewhat true in the grand scheme of things, we will also see that it deserves more credit. But for now, it's time to slay some rabbites. The combat initially seems just like a Zelda clone, with you moving around in Squarespace screens, and you swinging your sword while having standard equipment options. But the weapons you pick up throughout your adventure are what make the game stand out. Swords do a quick, wide swing if you tap A, but if you hold a directional button as well, you will do a stronger stab which can push the enemy back. But it has its risks of its thinner hit area and you can end up stepping into enemies. Axes have heavy, slower, wide swings. One of the most impressive parts of the game are the keen aesthetics. It was surprising to find how the animation and sound effects really make you feel its weight, like you're swinging an axe. It's fantastic work for a portable game and is what makes the combat feel so tactile. The axe can also be used to cut down trees, giving it a role in exploration, which was very revolutionary. The sickle performs a very slick, fast swing that spins all around you, though there is a slight momentary pause between uses. It can be used to cut down thick leaves. The chain flail is a straight shot in one direction, but it has great range. It can be used to attach itself to wood pillars to pull yourself across, predating Zelda's hookshot. The spear is again a very straight attack, and while powerful, you feel stuck in place with such a thin hit area and short range. The Morning Star is a powerful weapon that swings around like the sickle before stretching out like a flail. You can really feel that while the weapon is not slow, it's not fast either, but it makes up for it with raw power. It also replaces the need to buy mattocks as it can destroy cracked walls. Overall, you gain a surprising variety of weapons that feel and play differently, and are all fun to use. The only downside is that the game doesn't communicate their secondary uses, which can lead to some confusion. Certain enemies can also only be defeated by specific weapons and/or magic. On top of this, enemies move around in very unique and complex ways. Taken together, this all forces you to A. Be careful in your movements, and B. Strategize around each enemy. And I didn't expect that much out of a Game Boy game. It's satisfyingly complex. There's a really good variety of enemy setups and action that make different encounters interesting and fun. However, I also want to point out that there isn't always a proper sound effect or damage reaction to your attacks, so you don't always know and don't always feel if you're damaging them. And hitboxes can be a little wonky at times, and can lead to situations where you are hit very suddenly. Upon leveling up, you choose a stat to upgrade, which raise that attribute along with 2 others to a lesser extent. The system gives you quite a bit of control, allowing you to advance evenly or to specialize. Choosing a certain stat neglects another, giving importance to your choices, though it should be said that raising stamina constantly will essentially make you invincible. The will stat is the game's most interesting contribution here. By now, you've noticed this bar at the bottom of the screen. While not attacking, it begins to fill. When filled, hitting the attack button performs a max attack, which is different depending on your weapon. The will stat increases the speed at which it fills. All max attacks are 2 times powerful, and if you decide to use it on a magic attack, it does 4 times damage. One of my favorite parts of the game is how your use of max attacks evolves over the adventure, and reflect your character's growth. In the beginning, your gauge is so slow that it's only filled after long periods of not attacking, like being in a town. Then the speed makes it so that after traversing a bit of empty space or doing a puzzle, you'll be fortunate enough to use it again. Soon it becomes fast enough that after a moderate pause you can take advantage of it. And then it becomes that you can use it in a boss fight rather often. Finally, it becomes so fast that it's near instantaneous. The last few bosses feel so satisfying because how they become nothing but trying to navigate your max attacks. According to lore, these moves are an expression of a true Gemma Knight. It's RPG growth that ties together gameplay, story, and stats, which you're constantly aware of, and is very satisfying. To me, this is the real joy of the game. How your stat upgrades relate to both combat and story in a way that's intriguing and works well. In many ways, this was the first limit break style attack, and it's one of my favorites. And I'd love it if a modern game attempted to update this system. Magic includes a lot of the usuals. Fire is a homing attack, while the stronger lightning and later nuke require manual aim. Sleep is useful, but would be more so if it was easier to tell when enemies were asleep, other than them just standing still. One of the most interesting is ice, which you can control with the D-pad. It turns monsters into snowmen, though unfortunately it does not earn you any experience. There are also some items that cast the same thing but are more powerful. However, their utility is cut off by one of the game's biggest flaws: your inventory. This is a negative that it shares with other Game Boy Adventure games, in the form of its buttons and menus. you only have 2, meaning items and magic have to be on 1. So you're constantly pausing to go into your menus to switch weapons, magic, and items. And add in your terrible inventory, which means you're constantly correcting. I understand why this is so, but that doesn't mean I have to like it. It breaks the pacing and flow of the game, deters you from saving and using magic items, and it means you constantly have to use stuff right away or throw them out. And at the end of the day, that's simply annoying. Regardless, the whole of it is that the game feels shockingly great to play. It's surprising how they took care to make sure everything felt good. It still has that kind of stocky, slow, somewhat stiff step that Game Boy games were known for, and that does take much getting used to. But once you get past that, everything else just sticks into place and lets the game become a joy. A new addition is the Ask command. Using it with Fuji allows her to cast Regen on you. Others will give advice of some kind. Marcy the robot will restore your MP. For vocal characters, it doesn't really add much, other than Bogart's one line of lore, which I do appreciate. But for gameplay, it does add an interesting element. At least with Fuji, a constant companion who is often a welcome help against high damaging enemies. Using the Ask command does help build a feeling of camaraderie between the player and her, one that will pay off later on. The dungeon crawling makes up a majority of what you do in the game. The designs are undeniably Zelda-like, but are built more for this game's combat to face a variety of enemies in a number of different types of rooms. The dungeons become increasingly maze-like, with you having to figure out the areas, finding the right way forward, with divergences to items and things you'll need, and ultimately finding your way to the boss. There are also a number of puzzles, most of which are light, but the best of which are the ones that play into the unique mechanics this game has, and certain dungeons have their own unique gimmicks and challenges. A common element is having to break false walls, which I admit goes a little too far at times, as you'll be looking everywhere, stabbing all the walls to find your way forward. The strength of the dungeons is in how well paced they are. You enter a room, you spend time fighting different enemies who always offer something unique with their differing behaviors, or do a puzzle, all while making your way around that room, none of them overstaying their welcome, and are over in good enough time that you're on your way to the next area. It may be Zelda-like, but in many ways it is among the best of its kind. Adventure has some interesting implementations of RPG status effects, such as Dark and Paralyze. But then there is the dreaded Moogle status, and may there be mercy on our souls. This reduces your stats to nothing, and there is a high chance of you being 1 or 2 shot. By far, it's the cheapest thing in the game. And just to mention it, this is one of the first RPGs to have the best armor to be equipment drops, making obtaining the final gear somewhat annoying, though thankfully there is a trick to it. The difficulty overall is fair. Enemies deliver sufficiently punishing contact damage, which forces you to truly learn your movement and the extent of your capabilities as well as theirs. This may also play into your stat upgrade choices, as you'll often feel tempted to abandon them to upgrade your stamina, enhancing the game's sense of choice. Being able to save everywhere does help with the difficulty though. The true challenge, however, are the bosses, as this is one of the biggest boss games of its generation. There is a huge variety of them, all of which push your understanding of the gameplay and push you to your limit. The only issue is that the Game Boy's stiffer controls can clash with their fast speed at times, and along with the smaller arenas can be a bit of a pain. The bosses test your understanding of moving into position, patience in having to maneuver around their patterns to get into set position, and understanding weapon range. The Hydra moves up and down while weaving in and out, with water granting you safety distance, allowing you to accustom yourself to the game's boss philosophy. Cyclops and Carrie upgrade this model with physical rushes and no safety distance. Golem uses a similar pattern, though from the top of the screen, with a focus on faster and even diagonal rush attacks. Lee floats around, pushing your movement into positioning, but Medusa and Lich escalate this with speed, forcing you to be careful to not misstep into contact damage while engaging. The Megapede's limited hitbox and attempts to corral you with its body challenge your attempts to situate yourself, whereas Davius does so with bullet hell style attacks, though even he may be too much for Sumo's walking pace. The Crab tests patience with strafing and diagonal movement, making it difficult to know when it's safe to stop an attack. The Chimera adds ranged attacks, Mantis a limited damage dealing arena, and Ifrit is the ultimate contact damage version with its huge bouncing sprite. The Dark Lord is as if you were facing a mirror of yourself, but positioning still matters in that his sides are vulnerable. Admittedly, his movements are a little too sudden, and his lack of damage reaction gives no indication as to if you are actually hurting him. The Kraken requires precise timing of his actions to attack flawlessly. The Garuda is admittedly somewhat boring with a few ranged attacks and dives. The Dragon and Red Dragon use Medusa's model with stronger projectiles, while the Dragon Zombie uses the Hydra model, but both require max attacks to damage them, tying into your understanding of that mechanic's growth. The bosses work well in how they force you to find your footing in a tile-based action format. Many require their own understanding and there is constant escalation, allowing this to become one of the strongest boss titles of its generation. The main plot by Kitase is mostly basic. You go to a location, something happens, and you must do a dungeon. After meeting Bogard, we continue towards Wendell. While staying at a nearby manor, Fuji vanishes. With the help of a mysterious red mage, we must find an item to unveil the servant's true nature, then delve into the mansion to find Fuji. In Wendell, the mage tricks us as he's really Julius. After traversing many dungeons, we infiltrate the airship to rescue Fuji. But after she hands us the pendant, Julius kicks us off. The simplicity is doubled by the limited dialogue as expected of the Game Boy, but it's triply marred by the poor translation, allowing the plot to leave little impact. Amanda's story is the most ambitious. She steals Fuji's pendant to bargain for her cursed brother. We dive into Medusa's den, fight for her tears as they can heal Amanda's brother. Amanda is bitten and she begins to become a Medusa, and then must be killed by our hand. In fact, the game is laced with quite a few deaths and sacrifices. The tragedies perhaps struck a chord with those experiencing it in 1991, and perhaps the overall plot did as well. And the Amanda situation certainly deserves credit for making you be the one to press the button to kill your friend in such an early game. But with limited character intimacy and ways to dramatize the story, the somber tone and emotional impact do not land as strongly. But what is felt and remains strong is the world you experience along the way. Koichi Ishii, when developing the Seiken Densetsu or Mana franchise, wanted to create a fictional world above all else. He was inspired by his abstract memories of childhood, fantasy works such as Tolkien's Middle-earth saga, Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland, and Tove Janssen's Moomin. What he was interested in was a world with its own lore, concepts, and internal logic. For Ishii, his games are centered on experiencing all the fantasy elements in the world. The story's function is to lead us on a journey to see all the imaginative ideas it has to offer, meant to appeal to those who love how fantasy ideas have a sense of mystique. The internal concept and logic surrounds the mana tree atop Mount Alucia, sealed behind a waterfall no man could reach. The tree both supports the world and is supported by it as the source of both all mana and flowing waters. And the power it holds is what the Dark Lord of Glaive lusts for. Beginning with Bogard, we learn of various concepts such as the Lost Order of the Gemma Knights, those who protected the mana tree, and of the lore of the war with Vandal. Bogard's later explanation almost makes the Gemma Knights feel like Jedi and not just an order, as they have a power that is expressed by your max attacks. Though being honest, your journey to becoming one as a result of the sparse writing is only partly felt and hardly conveyed at times. The war with Vandal functions as the setting's background, a recent conflict surrounding the Vandal Empire who abused the mana tree's power. For increased Japanese RPG flair, present was a mysterious woman that wore Fuji's pendant who rallied the Gemma Knights, all of which has led to recent events. Even though we only receive a small amount of this lore, it still manages to tap into our natural intrigue with history. Vandal eventually will be expounded upon as this title's holders of ancient high technology, with their unique twist being their ability to construct gigantic structures atop sand, which is quite original as far as fantasy concepts go. The overworld you and Fuji traverse, while graphically what you expect of the Game Boy, has certain artistic nuances. The specific way the vegetation, swamps, and forests look, as well as the occasional architecture, give the world a certain look and feel. It is perhaps not fully realized, but it creates a style that future mana games would build upon. And you can even imagine the bright, lush color schemes of future games fitting in here. The Middle-earth novels have its adventurer's journey have a focus on each location with their lore and importance. Alice in Wonderland has Alice dealing with peculiar situation after situation in that world. And just like his influences, the odyssey from concept to concept is what truly drives this game. The mysterious manner in Mr. Lee are evocative of a certain other Mr. Lee in a movie role he played. We come across RPG tropes of the age, which when mixed along with everything else, adds to the setting, such as the mirror that reveals the truth, or plenty of Final Fantasy elements from mages to airships to dwarves, though that last one has a Tolkien bent in their mithril association, and later a chocobo egg hatches before us to reveal this game's transportation. In Wendell, through Sage Siba, we learn the Mana Tree and the mysterious woman who rallied the Gemma Knights is Fuji's mother. Their line are the acorns of the Mana Tree. The central unique mythology behind the tree is what manages to be intriguing even to this day, and each Seiken Densetsu centers itself on advancing the tree's mythology. And it is that basis upon the tree's importance to the physics of that world, as well as a living being behind it that has given the Mana games their own particular flavor. The Gaia Cave spits you out if you're not dressed in mithril, having the living mountain concept of Tolkien, the surreal absurdity of Wonderland, and the screwball design of Moomins. Despite Medusa's tragedy as a narrative not landing, all of the little elements are fascinating. The bard turned into a parrot, the power of Medusa's tears, Medusa in a bitter moment refusing to cry upon death, and the twist in that Amanda becomes a Medusa, who sheds the tear that heals her brother. And one line stands out as concise but powerfully written. One who was bitten by Medusa turns into Medusa. Davias's true form is a mind flayer to add some Dungeons and Dragons representation. His city initially contains no music, but Amanda's brother's singing fills the city with his song. One of the earliest attempts at transforming an entire city in an RPG. All in all, these serve as locations and ideas you encounter that bring life to the world in the way Ishii's influences had done themselves. Accompanying all these fantasy concepts and locations is Kenji Ito's soundtrack. It's amazing how well some of these tracks have aged. Many are even better than the new arrangements for the remix. However, a few such as the dungeon themes can sound grating on the air. These, and even some of the good songs, can sometimes feel incomplete with their short length, placing that raspiness on constant loop. But the ones that still work still have a strong resonance that bring the adventure to life. We now return to the Dark Lord's castle, which is poetic and feels like the end of a game. After saving Fuji, we duel the black-clad king. There is a personal feeling about it, perhaps because he's a sprite boss and not a giant monster. And I do appreciate his willingness to get his hands dirty. But as he dies, it turns out Julius has already taken the pendant, which he uses along with Fuji to gain access to the Mana Tree. And this is where the game deserves some credit. Rather than putting the impetus on the expected generic villain, we get this swerve and he's dead halfway into the game, and his second-in-command turns out to be the true schemer. Afterwards, Sumo has an argument with Bogard, yelling about his apprehensions. But the localization renders it hilarious. Why does it have to be me? Sumo, you do it! You're the Gemma Knight! It's you! We then hear some guy named Bow Wow took our injured chocobo's shattered legs and...
I don't even know what to say.
Anyway, you make up with Bogart, who says that since Julius has the power of mana, you need the Seiken, the Sacred Blade, or in localization, Excalibur. Surprising for a Game Boy game is the change in overworld music, reflecting the new story and Sumo's new convictions. The final stretch in terms of plotting is like most RPG endgames of the time, going from dungeon to dungeon to gain what is necessary. But we journey across interesting concepts such as crystal deserts to a frozen kingdom to a land of floating rocks. The rusty sword in the Cave of Floating Rocks remains that way until it deems its wielder worthy. A unique take on the legendary sword idea with its own internal logic, and it's always creative when someone takes an old idea and makes it new. The choice to remain vigilant and want this fits in with Sumo's arc of apprehension for what it's worth. We raise Vandol's dying tower. The visual of the structure rising is compelling, both graphically for the era as well as taking all we have heard about Vandol and making it palpable. Though the motivation that the reason we are raising the tower is just to reach the top of the mountain is a rather strange incentive. It feels weak compared to the grand structure we have to lift and traverse through. The tablets allow us to uncover the lore of Vandol, paced evenly across the dungeon to create a sense of build-up and suspense over what we are learning, and overall again appealing to our enjoyment of learning history. Simultaneously, it gives sufficient backstory to Julius, who was their prince they had hid in a cave. An annoying thing, however, is that the game does not tell you that this is the point of no return. And finally, we go up the waterfall to the Temple of Mana, with its majestic architecture, unique tiling, exclusive enemies, and its mythical music. That last one being both beautiful and haunting, both terrifying and serene, all of which can still be felt to this day. It is as if all of the mythology of the world you have experienced has led you to this place. The final passageway to the Mana Tree being this extended road as well as the sanctuary itself, having unique assets gives a sense of build-up and grandeur, that you have reached the most special place in this world. Fuji's mother transforms the rusty sword into the sacred blade. Despite it all, it does feel like Sumo's journey is complete. The final battle with Julius is an epic confrontation that is incredible for the Game Boy. The first form has you facing Julius and two copies who use long-range attacks to push your understanding of movement to the fullest. The second form is monstrous like most bosses, utilizing freer movement, ranged attacks, and dives, testing everything you have learned in all the boss fights. Julius completely drains the Mana Tree to obtain his third form, which uses teleportation to ambush you. His teleport timing is just enough to allow you to use your max attack, the Gemma Knight's trademark. Thus, the final boss is a pure example of the Gemma Knight performing his duty for the Mana Tree, again using gameplay stats and story. But also integrated here is another gameplay story synergy that remains powerful after all these years. You traveled with Fuji, who healed you through the Ask command time and time again. You built a camaraderie and relationship through gameplay, coming to appreciate her in a visceral way. Within the story, this exists at atop the narrative where you saved her or came close to saving her time and time again. A series of separations and reunions and failures. The fight together in this final battle feels as if this game has come full circle. Julius delivers massive contact damage, but Fuji's regen healing rate is balanced exactly for this occasion. When Fuji has to give everything up to become the new Mana Tree, and you receive this bittersweet ending, it's surprisingly effective. It's an emotional moment that works and remains so powerful. The final image of the sprout of the new Mana Tree has resonated in my mind since. It is perhaps the most compelling emotional moment of the very early RPG era. Seiken Densetsu would release in Japan and would garner lifetime sales of 500,000 units, and received fairly good critical reception. It would be released in the Americas as Final Fantasy Adventure, and for Europe's first Final Fantasy related release it would be titled Mystic Quest. This would be the only one until Final Fantasy VII. Sales outside of Japan were 200,000 and would garner a bit of critical praise as well. Seiken Densetsu would be the genesis of the franchise, known as the Mana series in the West, spawning many sequels and remakes. The first sequel would be Seiken Densetsu 2 or Secret of Mana for the Super Nintendo. The first remake would be a fully faithful one for mobile phones in Japan. It pretty much is a one-to-one build in as many ways as it possibly can. Sword of Mana was a complete remake for the Game Boy Advance, featuring gameplay overhauls, expanded story and characters, as well as Fuji being a playable character. Because of so many changes, some good, though many bad, I will cover it in detail another time. Adventure of Mana for mobile devices and the PS Vita attempts to be an identical remake of the original, though in 3D. However, it is lacking in terms of the nuances in terms of what made the original game great, such as in sound effects and animations. This will also be covered in detail at a later time. In terms of online digital stores, Seiken Densetsu has only been re-released on the Japanese eShop. Fortunately, Final Fantasy Adventure, Secret of Mana, and Trials of Mana have been released as the Seiken Densetsu Collection, also known as the Collection of Mana here in the West. The legacy of Seiken Densetsu or Final Fantasy Adventure or Mystic Quest should be taken note of. It eventually managed to break free of its Final Fantasy name association, becoming its own franchise. Multiple weapons became series mainstays, the world Koichi Ishii wanted bloomed and was iterated on, and gave way to new ideas. When I picked up Seiken Densetsu, I expected an old and dated game that may have resonated in its time, but I found more than that. In fact, when I beat the game months ago, my footage turned out to be bad. But eventually I found myself glad that it happened, because the more I play it, the more I appreciate how forward-thinking it was. And that a game like this came out only 2 years after the Game Boy was released is impressive. In both its successes as well as in its flaws, you can tell that effort and passion was put into this game. When you consider what this game did for the genre, what it did first, and how many of its elements come together, the first Mana title truly stands as one of the best action role-playing games of the very early RPG era, and is a game way ahead of its time. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe for future videos. If you would like to support the channel for as low as $1 a month, you may do so on my Patreon. Thank you for watching, and God bless you all.